My name is Elise, I'm 34, and I live on a quiet street in Sacramento where the houses are close enough to hear your neighbor sneeze, but far enough that you still wave from a distance. Our porch is painted soft blue, the kind of color you pick when you're hoping for peace, and every spring I plant zinnias along the walkway like it matters. I thought it did. I thought being the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and clipped coupons meant life would somehow protect me from the worst kinds of betrayals. I thought wrong. Jonah and I met when I was 25, married by 27, and by 30, I was collecting ovulation strips like raffle tickets. He said we had time, that babies were a later thing, a responsible thing, and I believed him because his voice was always calm and firm, like he knew how the world worked. I got used to waiting. Used to pushing away the ache every time a friend announced their pregnancy. When we finally started trying seriously, I thought I was ready, but nothing prepares you for how hope can become a wound you carry alone. It wasn't easy. I tracked every symptom, charted temperatures, took supplements that made my stomach churn. The doctors were kind but clinical, their voices practiced. "It'll happen," they'd say, handing me another form, another test. I watched Jonah become quieter in those years, more distant in ways I excused as stress. He was working late more often, not cruel, just unavailable. When I told him I was pregnant, finally, his face lit up like a man seeing land after months at sea. He hugged me hard, whispered, "You did it," as if I'd crossed a finish line he couldn't see. Something felt off almost immediately, but I pushed it down. The tiredness was unbearable, the nausea constant, and Jonah. Jonah was distracted. He didn't come to every appointment, said work was piling up. I let it go. Told myself this was normal, that I was too sensitive, that men weren't built for pregnancy in the same way. At night, I'd press his hand to my belly, searching for connection. Sometimes he'd leave it there, but his eyes would drift toward the TV, and I'd lie there, quietly trying to believe that love didn't always look the way you expected. Around the 10th week, I started spotting and panicked. He drove me to the hospital, silent the whole way, one hand clenched on the steering wheel. The nurse said it was normal, but I saw the way Jonah exhaled when she said the baby was fine, like he'd been holding a breath I hadn't known existed. That night, he brought me tea and rubbed my back, and for a moment I thought, maybe I was imagining the distance. Maybe everything was okay. But when I woke up, he was gone again, already dressed, already late for something he wouldn't name. I told my best friend, Lainey, that I felt like a guest in my own life. She said pregnancy messes with your head, that it was probably hormones, that Jonah would come around. She offered to come with me to my next scan if he bailed again. I said no. I didn't want to need anyone else. I wanted it to be him. I didn't know how to explain that what I was grieving hadn't even left me yet. That somewhere between our wedding and that hospital room, I'd started becoming someone I didn't recognize, and I couldn't name the moment it began. By the time we reached our second trimester, Jonah had stopped pretending. He still smiled, still kissed my forehead in the morning, but he didn't ask about the baby, didn't want to feel it kick. He said he was processing in his own way, which sounded reasonable until I realized it meant alone. I stopped telling him when I had appointments. He didn't ask. I started talking to the baby during walks around the neighborhood, whispering stories and promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I told her we were going to be okay, even when I didn't believe it. The nursery was the only thing he seemed excited about. He painted the walls pale gray without me asking, ordered a mobile of little silver moons that arrived before I even knew he'd bought it. I remember standing in that room, barefoot, watching him adjust the crib rails like it mattered, like we were still building a life together. I touched the soft fleece blanket draped over the armchair, the one with tiny owls stitched into the corners. That's when it hit me, this wasn't our nest anymore. It was mine. And I had no idea who he was building it for. It was raining the day of the anatomy scan, a steady, quiet kind of rain that seemed to soften the air, make the whole world feel hushed. I had a list of questions folded in my coat pocket, scribbled between episodes of heartburn and insomnia, things I wanted to ask the technician, about her spine, her heart, the way she moved when I played music in the kitchen. Jonah said he couldn't come. Something at the firm, something unavoidable. I told him it was fine, that I'd record the heartbeat, but I didn't press. I already knew how the day would go. The technician was kind, her voice low and warm, like someone trained to speak softly around breakable things. She moved the wand across my belly and said everything looked perfect. I tried not to cry. Tried to stay still while she took the measurements, printed out the black and white images that I'd stared at 1,000 times on Pinterest, always wondering what it would feel like to have them in my hands. I asked for extra copies, one for the fridge, one for the baby book, one just to keep in my purse, and she smiled, said of course. I stopped at the front desk to schedule the next appointment, still floating somewhere between awe and exhaustion, when the receptionist asked if I wanted the images emailed again, like last time. I blinked. I hadn't asked for them to be emailed before. She tapped the screen, her nails clicking gently. Just confirming, same email as before? Gee, Harper at my throat closed around the answer. I nodded, smiled, walked out into the rain with my coat unbuttoned, my bag slipping off my shoulder, my feet unsure of the pavement beneath them. I didn't feel the cold until I reached the car. I sat there for a long time, one hand on my belly, the other shaking as it held the ultrasound printouts. Gee, Harper. I said it out loud, once, like maybe hearing it would make it less real, less sharp. It didn't. I thought maybe it was a billing mistake, a data entry error, something clerical. I told myself that all the way home, even as my stomach churned, even as I walked into the house and heard his voice in the kitchen, low, laughing, the way he used to sound with me. I didn't call out. I stood in the hallway and listened. He was on speaker. I could hear her voice, warm, polished, careful in the way women are when they know they're being watched. She said something about a stroller, and he said she'd love it. I didn't know who she was supposed to be. The baby, maybe? Me, possibly. But the way he said it made something twist in my chest. I walked away before he saw me, left the photos on the counter next to the bills, and went upstairs to shower, letting the water drown the sound of her name looping inside my head like a secret I already knew. That night, he held me like nothing had changed, like we were still us. He kissed the top of my head, asked how the scan went, smiled when I told him everything looked perfect. I waited for him to ask about the pictures, to look at them, to hold them the way I did. He didn't. He just nodded and turned back to the TV. I lay beside him on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the baby roll inside me, and wondered if she could feel it too, that something in our house was splintering, quietly, invisibly, like wood swelling before it cracks. The next morning, I checked the clinic's patient portal and found the delivery confirmation. The images had been emailed to a woman named Gabrielle Harper with a mailing address listed in Roseville. I stared at it so long my eyes blurred. I didn't know what to do with the information, didn't know who to become. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was suspended in that place between denial and dread, where you want someone to prove you wrong but no one ever does. I closed the laptop, wiped the counter, folded a dish towel, and made myself a cup of tea I wouldn't drink. By afternoon, I had memorized her name, written it quietly in my journal like a question that didn't belong to me. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't scream. I watched Jonah water the front lawn that evening, the hose sweeping in wide arcs, the way he used to when we first bought the house. He looked so calm, so ordinary, like a man preparing for something he wanted. I stood at the nursery doorway, staring at the Moon mobile he'd installed, and for the first time, I wondered if I was preparing her for a life I wouldn't get to live. It started with the dishwasher, a broken latch that wouldn't click into place, the kind of small domestic problem that makes you feel like your life is held together by thin thread. Jonah was at work, or said he was, so I pulled out the drawer and rummaged through the filing cabinet for the home warranty paperwork. The drawer stuck for a moment, then gave way, revealing a folder I hadn't seen before, thick, yellowed at the edges, wedged between tax returns and old appliance manuals. It was labeled simply medical, but the weight of it felt like something else entirely. I didn't open it right away. I stood there, one hand resting on the wood, the other holding the folder like it might bite. The dishwasher beeped behind me, impatient. When I finally peeled back the cover, I saw my name in block letters, followed by terms I didn't recognize, phrases like gestational agreement, intended parents, compensation structure. The words blurred together as I skimmed, my heartbeat crashing into my ears. My signature was there, twice. It was dated from a month before I started fertility treatments. The pen strokes looked like mine, but my hand had never signed that page. I sat down on the kitchen floor, my back pressed against the cool cabinet doors, the folder open in my lap. There were legal documents, notarized statements, even a bank ledger showing transfers I hadn't noticed, money moving from accounts I didn't check often, amounts that matched every copay, every hormone injection, every doctor visit I'd chalked up to shared cost. There was a section outlining confidentiality, a line that stated clearly, "The surrogate agrees to relinquish all parental rights upon delivery." My name, next to that sentence, sat like a bruise I hadn't realized was forming. I don't know how long I sat there, the tile cold beneath my thighs, the kitchen slowly dimming as the day moved past me. At one point, I reached for my phone, scrolled through old texts, looking for something, anything, that would explain this, something he'd said that I could reinterpret, some hint that maybe I'd missed. But there was nothing. Only silence between the lines. Only the sound of the dishwasher trying to start again, humming weakly, like it too was pretending everything still worked. I stood up slowly, put the folder back exactly where I found it, and fixed the latch. That night, I made dinner like I always did: rosemary chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, steamed broccoli cut into soft, bite-sized pieces. Jonah walked in just after 6, kissed my cheek, complimented the smell. He set the table without being asked, joked about the traffic, asked if I'd rested that day. I nodded, poured him water, smiled when I needed to. I watched his face as he chewed, wondering how many lies a person can tell without choking. I waited for him to notice something in my eyes, but he never looked long enough. He cleared his plate and kissed my temple before bed. After he fell asleep, I slipped out of bed and stood in the doorway of the nursery. The moonlight fell softly across the crib, catching the edge of the mobile that now spun quietly, its shapes casting shadows along the wall. I held my belly with both hands, whispering her name under my breath for the first time. A name I hadn't told anyone. A name I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to keep. She kicked once, gently, like she heard me, like she understood. I stood there until my legs ached, until I could breathe without breaking apart. The next morning, I emailed a copy of the documents to myself, saving them under a fake folder name buried deep in my laptop. I printed another copy and placed it in the bottom of my sock drawer, under the maternity pajamas I never wore. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, didn't know what any of it meant legally, but I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paperwork gone wrong. This was planned. Carefully. Quietly. And I had been left out of the planning, even as I carried the consequence under my heart, day after day. Later that afternoon, I walked past Jonah's laptop, still open on the counter, a cup of cold coffee beside it. A notification flashed across the screen. Meeting with G. Harper confirmed, 2 p.m. I didn't click it. I didn't need to. I walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and listened to the sound of the washing machine spin. In that moment, everything in my house felt borrowed, like a life someone else had designed, down to the last folded towel. I stared at the blank television screen, my hands resting on my stomach, and whispered, "Again, I see you." I met her in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt sugar and oversteamed milk, the kind of place with chalkboard menus and soft jazz humming overhead. Gabrielle Harper wore a cream sweater that looked too soft for November, her nails painted the same pale pink as her lips, her coat folded neatly across her lap like she was waiting for a cab, not a confrontation. She stood when I walked in, smiled politely, like we were old acquaintances meeting for a catch-up. I didn't sit right away. I looked at her hands first, wondered if they'd ever touched my child. She introduced herself like I didn't already know, her voice low, cautious, every word carefully arranged. She said she was sorry for the confusion, that she hadn't meant to overstep. She said Jonah told her I knew. That I had agreed. that I had trouble carrying to term, and this was something we had decided as a family. I let her speak, let her stack the lies like teacups, one after another, waiting for the moment they'd topple. I asked her one question: when did he tell you I agreed? She blinked, looked down, reached for her drink, but didn't answer. There was a file in her tote bag, the corner peeking out like it was trying to escape. I recognized the clinic logo, the same one on my appointment cards, my blood work summaries. She caught me looking and hesitated, then pulled it out and placed it gently on the table between us, like a peace offering. Inside were printed emails, forms with both our names, ultrasound images I hadn't seen, dated weeks before mine. Gabrielle turned the folder so I could read it right side up. I flipped through slowly, page after page of my pregnancy, documented in a life that wasn't mine. I thought you knew, she said again, but softer this time, less sure. She said Jonah told her I was struggling emotionally, that I didn't want to bond too early, that I needed space. He said I was strong, brave, selfless. He said I wanted this for them. Her hands trembled when she said it, like she didn't fully believe it herself anymore. I asked if she picked out the crib. She nodded. Said she found it online. Said she had it delivered in secret so I wouldn't feel overwhelmed. I didn't ask who paid. I already knew it wasn't her card. She told me they were planning a name, Hazel, after her grandmother. She said it softly, like it was something sacred, like saying it aloud made it real. I didn't speak. I just looked at her, at the way her fingers curled around the cup, the way she kept glancing at my stomach, as if she had a right to it. Her mouth kept moving, small explanations trying to stitch together a story that had already come undone. I wondered if she saw me as a woman or just a vessel, if she dreamed about the baby the way I did every night. When I stood to leave, she reached for my hand, but I stepped back, gently, without words. There was nothing else to say. Outside, the air smelled like wood smoke and damp leaves, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without shaking. I walked past the baby boutique she probably loved, past the stroller in the window with a ribbon already tied to the handle. I wondered if she pictured herself pushing it, if she imagined strangers stopping to admire her daughter's soft curls, her quiet coos. I wondered if she ever stopped to wonder how I felt. That night, Jonah asked where I'd been, his voice even, his hands busy folding laundry that didn't need folding. I told him I saw her. He looked up once, then back down at the socks, nodding slowly like someone waiting for instructions. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I just told him to sleep in the guest room for now, that I needed the bed to myself. He didn't argue. He just stood there, holding one of the baby's onesies in his hands, and for the first time, he looked like someone who didn't know how to fix what he broke. Later, I walked into the nursery and stood there quietly, watching the mobile spin above the empty crib. I took the blanket off the armchair, folded it slowly, placed it in the dresser drawer beneath the tiny socks. I touched each item once. Each book, each stuffed animal, each soft thing they had picked for a child they thought would never know me. I whispered my daughter's name, my name for her, the one I'd never told anyone, the one I dreamed long before I saw her heartbeat flicker on a screen. I whispered it again, and this time, I said it out loud. The labor started just after midnight, slow and steady, the kind that doesn't rush, but makes its intention clear. I didn't wake Jonah. I didn't leave a note. I packed my bag in silence, slipped on the cardigan I kept folded at the foot of my bed, and drove myself to the hospital, the streets empty, lights blinking yellow like the city was holding its breath. At the red light by the park, I pressed my hand against my stomach and whispered that she was safe, that we were almost there, that this was ours and no one else's. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and linen, and I felt strangely calm, even as the contractions deepened, even as the hours stretched into gray morning. A nurse held my hand while they prepped me, her voice soft and certain, asking if someone would be joining me soon. I said maybe, though I knew he wouldn't. I didn't want him there. I didn't want his voice in that room. I wanted silence, breath, space to feel every part of this, to hear her before I saw her, to hold her before anyone tried to take her from me. The doctor arrived just before sunrise, her hands practiced, her face kind but focused. They dimmed the lights, let music play low in the background, Debussy, I think, something with slow piano and long, curling notes. I counted every push like a prayer, gripped the rail so tight my fingers ached, and when it happened, when her cry filled the room, something inside me cracked open. She was placed on my chest, warm and wet and blinking, her fists curling into my skin. I whispered her name, the real one, the only one, and she turned toward my voice like she knew. They tried to call him. The hospital, I mean. He'd left me as the emergency contact, but didn't answer the phone. Eventually, they left a message and moved on, busy with charts and check-ins and other deliveries down the hall. I didn't ask again. I held her close and watched the morning light stretch across the curtain, watched the world keep moving outside while everything in me shifted. Her fingers were so small, her lashes dark and delicate, her breath uneven at first, then steady. I stayed awake the whole night, afraid to miss even a moment of knowing her. The discharge papers were routine, forms in triplicate, boxes to check, signatures to scrawl even with hands still shaking. The nurse asked what name to put on the birth certificate, her pen hovering. I said it clearly, spelling each letter slowly, watching the nurse nod as she wrote it down. No second line. No father listed. Just me. The woman who carried her, who named her, who heard her heartbeat before anyone else could, who stayed when everyone else stepped aside. They wheeled us out together in the afternoon sun, her wrapped in the blanket from the nursery I reclaimed. The house was quiet when we returned, too clean, too staged, like a model home someone lived in only on weekends. I carried her through each room, whispered introductions to the hallway light, to the clock that ticked too loudly, to the armchair in the nursery where I now sat holding her. I noticed the mobile had stopped spinning, its cord tangled, one of the moons missing. I left it that way. I didn't need it anymore. She didn't need it either. We had each other, and I would teach her to look up and imagine things spinning that no one else could see. I found Jonah's suitcase by the front door the next morning, half-packed, confused, as if he couldn't decide whether he was leaving or hoping I'd ask him to stay. He never came to the hospital. He never called. He left a note that said, "We should talk," folded once, no date, no name at the bottom. I threw it away. There was nothing left to say. He hadn't shown up when it mattered, hadn't stood in the space between her and a lie, hadn't seen the moment she arrived and made me whole again. Some things can't be returned to. That night, I held her against my chest, listening to her breath, slow and sure, her tiny hand resting just above my heart. I didn't know what would happen next, what papers might come, what battles might be waiting in sealed envelopes, but in that moment, none of it reached us. She was mine. Entirely, unquestionably mine. And even if the world tried to say otherwise, tried to write over what was already etched in me, they wouldn't find a line to erase. I had lived it. I had carried it. And now she was home. The envelope came on a Wednesday, thick and heavy, hand-delivered by someone who didn't look me in the eye. I opened it at the kitchen table while my daughter napped in the next room, the soft hum of the baby monitor almost lulling me into forgetting what I was holding. Inside were court documents, typed in legal language that made my stomach turn. They were suing for custody, Jonah and Gabrielle, citing the surrogate contract, claiming I had agreed, that I was unstable, that I had bonded too deeply with a child that wasn't mine. The air felt thinner with every page. I read it twice before I stood up, one hand braced on the counter, the other shaking. The story they had crafted was so careful, so believable from a distance. Gabrielle's affidavit called me generous, but misguided. Jonah's claimed I was emotionally volatile, prone to confusion. They had forged consent through silence, rewritten every skipped conversation into approval. It wasn't just a legal claim. It was a story, one they thought could hold up in court, because I hadn't screamed when I should have, hadn't left when I first saw her name printed under mine on those documents. My lawyer asked for everything: texts, emails, clinic records, payment logs, and I gave it all, but it didn't feel like enough. Then I remembered the voice memo. I found it buried in an app one hadn't opened in months, recorded without thought, just a note to self during one of those slow, hormonal days. Jonah's voice was clear, low, speaking into his phone in the hallway, saying they'd wait until 6 months, that I wouldn't know, that Gabrielle's cycle would line up by then. I played it twice, then sent it to my attorney without hesitation, my hands steady this time. The day of the hearing was cloudy, the kind of gray that sits just above the horizon but never breaks. I wore a blue dress that still smelled faintly of lavender and carried my daughter in her car seat, her fingers wrapped around a plush fox she'd started sleeping with. Jonah stood beside Gabrielle in pressed navy, his jaw set like someone preparing for war. Gabrielle avoided my eyes. She looked thinner than before, her face drawn, her shoulders tight. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in from every side, making even footsteps sound intrusive. We hadn't expected her. Jonah's mother. She sat behind me, her purse clutched tightly in her lap, her hair pinned the same way it had been at our wedding. I hadn't seen her in months, not since the baby shower she skipped without explanation. She nodded once when I turned around, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded canvas tote. Inside was a baby bag, embroidered, pale pink, with my daughter's name stitched across the front in looping script. The name I hadn't told anyone, hadn't written anywhere public. She handed it to my lawyer quietly, eyes never leaving Jonah. The bag had been found in the trunk of his car, she said, left there after Gabrielle's last appointment. She had seen the name and recognized it. She hadn't told anyone until now. The courtroom shifted slightly after that, a silent kind of ripple. My lawyer submitted it as evidence alongside the voice memo, the two pieces connecting like magnets, holding weight the papers alone couldn't. Jonah sat straighter, like he'd forgotten to breathe, and Gabrielle stared down at her hands, her shoulders trembling just enough for the judge to notice. The room exhaled, but I didn't move. I held my daughter through most of it, her cheek pressed against my collarbone, her breathing slow and even. The judge listened closely, his eyes flicking between the documents, the timeline, the audio. He didn't rush. He didn't dismiss. He asked one question: what name did you whisper to her first? I answered without hesitation, watching Gabrielle flinch. The judge leaned back, folded his hands, and wrote something down. That was the moment I knew the case was slipping from them, not all at once, but piece by piece, unraveling the story they had built too neatly, too far from truth. Afterward, the hallway was silent, everyone moving slowly, avoiding one another. Jonah walked past without a word, his shoes echoing on the linoleum. Gabrielle trailed behind, her face pale, her steps unsteady. I watched them go, my daughter tucked against my chest, the baby bag slung over my shoulder. I didn't feel victorious. I felt quiet, like the last page of a book where nothing is said, but everything has changed. Outside, the sky had started to break open, a soft rain falling over the courthouse steps. I stepped into it slowly, whispering her name again, just for us. The article went live on a Sunday, tucked inside a digital column on medical ethics and maternal rights, published under a pseudonym I chose quickly, something that didn't sound like me but still carried my voice. It wasn't revenge, just record. I wrote every line with care, choosing truth over anger, memory over opinion. I included dates, receipts, direct quotes, things no one could dispute. The story didn't scream. It whispered. Still, by Monday, it had reached over 100,000 readers, shared in quiet corners of the internet by women who didn't want to say "me too," but felt it anyway. The fallout came slowly at first, like a slow leak in a sealed room. Jonah's firm removed his photo from their website within the week. A press release followed, terse, impersonal, full of phrases like "under review" and "transition of leadership." Gabrielle's name disappeared from a handful of charity boards and event invitations, the silence around her louder than any scandal. They didn't respond publicly. I didn't expect them to. But friends of friends stopped calling. Invitations stopped coming. The shape of their lives shifted, not ruined, just smaller, edged with discomfort. I watched from a distance, holding my daughter closer each day. Jonah tried once, 2 months later, showing up at the edge of my driveway like a salesman with nothing to sell. He wore a soft sweater, the kind he used to sleep in, and held a small brown bag with formula and a rattle inside. I opened the door halfway, listened. He said he'd read the piece. He said he understood. He said he missed her. I didn't say much. I let him speak, then handed him a photo from her first birthday, the only one he'd ever get, and closed the door with a "thank you, too quiet to argue." Gabrielle never came. She sent an email once, short, apologetic, filled with language that read like it had been approved by someone else. She said she wished me peace. Said she was stepping away from everything for a while. She didn't ask about the baby. Didn't ask for photos. I sat with the message for a long time before deleting it. She had built a future in her head and watched it collapse without touching the pieces. I didn't hate her. I just didn't want her name in my inbox. Some people drift away without needing to be pushed. I moved north after that, to a small town where no one knew me, where the grocery clerks only asked about coupons and the neighbors waved, but didn't linger. I rented a cottage with peeling shutters and a patchy garden, the kind of place that made space for quiet. The first night, I sat on the porch with my daughter asleep against my chest, her breath warm through the cotton of my shirt. The stars looked closer out here, like they didn't need permission to be seen. I let my feet rest on the wooden railing and exhaled without planning to. Mornings became soft again. Cereal at the counter, little feet kicking beneath the table, sunlight creeping across the floor in slow golden lines. I started writing again, not stories about loss or motherhood, just words that felt like mine. I watched her grow without interruption, her curls tighter by the week, her voice learning new sounds like tiny treasures. She laughed the way I used to, from the belly, unfiltered. We went to the farmer's market every Saturday. The baker there started saving us the last strawberry tart each week, wrapping it in wax paper and tucking it under the register. Sometimes people asked about her father. Soft questions, harmless really, but I answered simply, honestly, without weight. "It's just the two of us," I'd say, and they'd nod, the way strangers do when they don't want to step too far into something private. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The truth lived in her, in the way she reached for me when she was tired, in the way her eyes searched for my face before sleep. She didn't know the story yet. She would one day. But for now, she only needed to know that I stayed. That I chose her. On her second birthday, I baked the cake myself, pale yellow with vanilla icing and tiny sugar flowers she picked out at the market. She smeared frosting on her chin, clapped her hands, laughed when I lit the candles. I held her close as we swayed to an old record, the music soft and crackling. Outside, the trees moved with the wind, and everything felt just light enough to carry. I looked at her face, kissed the top of her head, and whispered the name I gave her, the one they tried to claim. She smiled in her sleep, and I knew we were home.